So today we are talking to Brian Rea, a veteran marketer who has developed the Incite for Execution course, which we are hosting on the School of Thought. He describes it as the definitive influencing toolkit for project leaders, with a description of how to communicate and influence stakeholders for better project execution and outcomes. So Brian, before we get into the nub of the course, tell us a little bit about your background.
Thanks, Gillian. Yeah, background. Well, as many people in SA, my career began in Unilever. I studied at Rhodes, did a degree in journalism, and went on to do honors in industrial psych, and then went into Unilever, and then pretty much worked every major lane on the freeway system that my education qualified me to do. So operational sales, aka repping, category management and key account management, brand development, and then later on brand building, which included all kinds of things like shopper marketing. So a bit of a mishmash. And over a decade and a half, I worked on both primarily in the food side, with occasional look-ins to household and personal care. And then I went out on my own. I pursued a career as a freelancer. And I suppose you could say that's when the real fun started, because apart from my wheelhouse in FMCG, where I continued to serve Unilever and other FMCGs, I started to work in interesting places like bottlers, telcos, sporting institutions, technology companies, and so on. And I suppose that rounded me off a little bit. It also showed me how little, at the same time, how broad marketing can actually be. How common the themes are and the principles are, but at the same time, how quickly out of your depth you can get if you're not prepared to sit down and understand a foreign environment. So yeah, that's a bit about me.
That sounds like a big learning. Wow.
Has been, yeah.
Unilever really is kind of certainly here is almost a university of marketing in itself. So that's it's interesting to get out of that, where I suppose in a way you feel like you've seen it all, you've been exposed to it all, and then realize that there's this commonality, but so many differences as well. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think the other thing about it, Gillian, is you can't expect to use the same language that's used in a big company like Unilever with smaller or medium-sized organizations, or even big organizations that haven't quite yet got their head around marketing and use it as a euphemism for making pamphlets and sending out emails. And you really have to start rethinking your phraseology and the way in which marketing manifests in that world. And that was a big learning for me.
Yeah. So I mean, in your course, and we're going to talk about it now, you talk about getting rid of ambiguous language.
Yeah.
And kind of, getting rid of jargon. And I love that section on it, because I think marketing is one of those areas that's just filled with jargon. And it absolutely does not mean the same thing to one person as it does to another. So tell us a little bit about the course and what led you to developing it as it is.
Cool. Well, I'll start from the end backwards. And you gave it a fantastic intro, the likes of which I've almost forgotten existed. You so often create the promotional material for a course, and then somebody catches you off balance and asks you what the course is about, and you've got to go back to the original written thing. But chapter and verse, I would say the course is, let me start with the course and work backwards as to what influenced me. The course is, as you say, an influencing toolkit, primarily for project leaders. I kind of had brand managers in mind, but indeed anybody who had an idea that they wanted to bring into the world and who depended on other people to make that happen, whether it was an HR practitioner looking to bring a new service into the organization, whether it was a leader of a company looking to drive transformation. I suppose I was thinking about those types of people as well. And when this idea kind of came to me, I was actually leading a course with Ali Tucker in Nairobi. I remember it almost to the month. And it struck me that the course, it was a soft skills course for marketers, for project leaders, and it didn't go deep enough in this area of influencing people. It went some way, but didn't go far enough. And I started to think what a product like this could look like, and immediately thought, well, there are a lot of presentation skills companies out there. There are a lot of project management companies training people in the rudiments of project management, but most of those err on the side of project networks and project timelines. And it felt as though something was missing. Some key point of leverage was actually missing. And then one day I was coming back from Joburg and I picked up a book by Dan Pink in Exclusive Books there called To Sell is Human, which I'd recommend to anybody. It's a delightful book. It's easy to read. It's almost the sort of book you can read in an hour-and-a-half flight between Durban and Cape Town. And he talks about something called non-sales selling. And let me read that chapter and verse. It is persuading your subordinates, your peers, and your senior stakeholders to get behind your project or your idea, and this is important, to stay behind it until that project or idea crosses the line, comes into the world, manifests in the form of a new way of thinking, a new product, a new service, whatever it might be. And Pink goes on to say, and this was the shock statistic that really was the eureka moment for me, is that most middle managers, and he's quoting a global survey in 2014 by a company called Qualtrics, most middle managers spent 40% of their time on non-sales selling. That's 24 seconds out of every minute. And that really gave me the rocket fuel to go about thinking about this course. And it struck me then that successful project leaders, in order to do this non-sales selling, need to do three things. Firstly, they owe their followers a compelling idea, as Simon Sinek would say, a strong why. Secondly, they need to be very specific. They need to define and choreograph the critical plays over the course of the project, which is not always something that's done very, very well. Not by project leaders anyway. We often leave that up to the network manager to tell us. And then the third thing they need to do is they need to be seeing from another dimension. They need to manage and direct energy for the duration of the project.
Yeah.
And the more I looked at it, the more I realized that project managers were doing one or other of these things. They were not giving us the full basket. And it was because of two dangerous assumptions. The first one is they were leaving it up to the network to do the work for them. Gillian, it reminded me of university exam time, where you would go and sit down in study week and you would put together a study timetable. And then once having done that, you go outside and play soccer with the guys, thinking that the study timetable would do the hard work. And there's a little bit of that. I was guilty of it. But I think project managers, once they've got that project timeline, they imagine that the clock is ticking and all we need to do is just manage it by the timeline. I mean, that's partly true, but it's not the full story. The second thing that they forget to do is it's a sin of commission, is that they think that the PowerPoint inaugural, that presentation that they took to the board to get the approval, to get the thing out of the idea phase of the funnel into the actual contract phase, they think that that's going to do all the hard work over the long game. And as we've spoken about, execution is like a game of golf. No golfer pitches up to play 36 holes on the first day out with one golf club. They understand that the next 4 or 5 hours of golf are going to deal many different lays. The weather's going to do many different things. The wind is going to do many different things. Their temperament is going to be here, there, and everywhere, depending on how they're doing. And golf is a long game. And you have to draw the club and take the advice of your caddy, depending on the way things are going for you. And projects are exactly a lot like that. So I think that was the inspiration, the definitive influencing toolkit, with the point of leverage being how much time people spend on non-sales selling, on persuading other people, not just to get behind, but to stay behind their ideas. And hopefully we've created something that makes that a lot more intuitive, a lot simpler, actually, without being without being a distraction.
Yeah, I mean, I found when I was going through it initially, I found it so interesting because I think, as you say, so many project management courses and principles focus on managing timelines and managing, resources, and it's kind of very practical. But you talk about that long game of execution, which I find interesting. I mean, the work that these PowerPoint decks have to do is quite we expect a lot from them. But also what I love so much about your course is just the idea of building this narrative and landing it and getting people to support you through the execution, rather than, one lone person pushing it through, which I think so often seems to be. So I know that in your sort of suite of experiences, you landed up being a coach for TEDx speakers, and you talk about that quite a bit in the course. And how did that influence your thinking?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I actually drove very hard to apply and be selected to be a speaker coach. I saw that as very foundational to my skill set. TED have done just some amazing things, and in a nutshell, I think what they've done. And I was listening to a chat with Chris Anderson on the weekend talking about the TED journey from 2007. In the space of about 15 years, they've almost done the impossible. They've made people customers of ideas that they would not normally have cared about. So you can go and watch a TED talk on procrastination, and suddenly, you've had a revelation on something you just never really thought about. You can go watch a talk about.
I've seen that monkey one. Yeah.
Yeah, you can go and watch a talk about agricultural practice in rural areas of northern Zambia, or whatever the case may be. And suddenly you are captivated and you become a customer of the idea, meaning you now seek out information on these topics for yourself beyond the TED talk. And that is an extraordinary achievement. So they've done this by making, one, ideas accessible. In other words, I don't have to be a scientist or a philosopher or a medical practitioner or a coder to get the idea. And then they've made me care about those ideas. And so you asked the question, what did I learn from the TED experience? Well, two things. Firstly, the workplace really suffers from a lack of what TED is actually doing. I think project leaders are not working hard enough to make great project ideas accessible to their constituents, to their stakeholders, to the people they are going to rely on to bring their idea into the world. So, and there's two parts to that accessibility. There's emotional accessibility. In other words, making me care. It's my heart, it's the why, as Sinek says. And then there's mental availability, which is the actual gray matter needed to get things done, to execute. So it's heart and head, people having a sense of why are we doing this, but also a sense of the critical plays, the critical risks we've got to work with, the critical milestones, the must-wins, and so on and so forth. And so what I've tried to do is build a canvas that incorporates those two, at times, competing dimensions.
Yeah. So
and again, sorry.
No, carry on.
And I think the sort of final lesson I take from TED is none of that just happens. So to give an example, I thought it'd be great, get an email. Yep, Brian, you've been accepted to be a coach. No, you had to attend 16 hours of training in person.
Yeah.
And then you met your speaker. Then you met the speaker that you were going to be assigned to. And only then did the coaching relationship start. So if they invest that much in their speakers, there's a very deliberate, intentional investment in the TED way, which then cascades down to the speaker. Lauren Jacobs, who's a Cape Town author, was delegated to myself and another lady as well. The two of us actually coached her. And Lauren literally, she told me towards the end that she had spent about 5 hours of preparation for every minute she was on stage, and she was 15 minutes on stage. So there's food for thought. And before it sounds like it was a very, kind of top-heavy, authoritative thing, do this. TED relies very heavily on community skill building as well. So they build communities of learning. And in this way, it's kind of a self-replicating system, which I absolutely love about the TED system. And we've tried to build that also into the learning experience, where cohorts of people teach and reinforce with each other. Because genuinely, this is a team sport.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it. I mean, so broadly, how would you describe the components of the course? Broadly,
okay. Again, a lot of little moments of revelation and I suppose the scales falling from the eyes. And the other was a quote by a retired US Army General, Stanley McChrystal, who spoke about change being like an unruly horse. And of course, execution is all about change. So I politely co-opted McChrystal's definition and wrote that execution is like an unruly horse. It must be treated as an extended process, a journey of twists, turns, starts, and stops. And I had the sense that there's one thing to look at a project. The ancient Greeks used to talk about chronos time, which was literally seconds, minutes, hours. But they also spoke about kairos time, which was how the soul experiences time. And that was something that is very seldom spoken about in projects. Those moments when people need to be, when the soul actually needs to be spoken to, people need to take time out. So they need to understand where they are. They need to get perspective. They need to zoom out before they can zoom in again. So with that in mind, really there are 3 parts to this course. Part 1 is, I suppose many of my delegates find it the hardest to get their head around, but it is a critical sort of preparation phase. Firstly, it's about connecting with yourself. Do you agree with the project that you have to now persuade other people about? Do you understand the scope? How well do you understand the people you have to lead? And so stakeholder management is a big part of that. And we really encourage people to not be put off by the natural resistance that they're going to receive from stakeholders, that they must embrace that resistance and turn those insights into the springboards for execution. And then we talk about the neuroscience of execution, which is the most fun part, because the human brain can only absorb and manage so much information. And when we understand the neuroscience, we have a better handle on how to stage our communication. It's not just a once-off, it's an ongoing thing. Sometimes it's more about heart and less about head. Sometimes it's the exact opposite. Communication is more critical at certain phases than it is at others. So that's part 1. Part 2 is really the landing gear of all of that. It's, I call it the rudiments of memorable and motivating messaging. And it's all about cultivating big ideas, using, going to war against ambivalent language and vocabulary and TLAs, 3-letter acronyms and all that jazz. How to use stories, how to use all of your messaging assets to manage that energy and drive the critical plays. And then part 3 is highly practical. That is the, whilst we can't possibly help people develop the full suite of communication that might run for the duration of a 10-month project, we can really help them with that project inaugural. Which is in many ways the set piece of the course. And so it's about rolling all these insights into a live action, depending on which product, which learning version of this course you buy. In the ideal set of circumstances, the one I wish everybody would buy is the one where teams actually focus on a live action challenge and apply these principles there. So yeah, I mean, that's the course in a nutshell, big nutshell.
So, I mean, just to clarify, and I'll put some more information at the end, we've got various versions of the course, which is that you can do it on your own, online, and it's very interactive. It's got lots of lovely things. And then there's a version with a little bit of coaching. Then there's a version with a bit more coaching, which is in a cohort-based. So you can do it in a group. And then there's obviously the full blended live wonderful thing where you take a team through the process and they actually build something together at the end. So, but I'll put some information about that at the end.
Right.
Brian, in your in the course you talked about the elephant and the rider. And it was the first time I'd seen that and I'd heard about it. And for me, it just made such beautiful sense in terms of understanding who you're talking to and understanding what kind of information is going to drive it forward. And I think I'm going to ask you to explain it in a bit more detail, but I think what tends to happen is we tend to overload people with information that's actually not connecting in the right way. So can you explain a little bit about the elephant and the rider?
Yeah, it's a brilliant analogy. And it was I'd done a bit of reading about the brain. I mean, the level system 1 and system 2 of thinking, and it's all great, but never did I come across an analogy that really helped me understand it as well as this. And let me give you an example, because it goes back to the World Cup in 2019. I mean, who didn't see that? Who didn't burst into tears when we won this dream final? The team that just 3 years before was nowhere. We came off that. I certainly came off it. It was a Sunday afternoon, just believing that this country, South Africa, was capable of anything. Monday morning, I had to jump into a meeting to help somebody from a non-profit sharpen their strategy on rural development. And what was thrown in front of me in that meeting was a file about this thick with everything you needed to know about the problems in rural areas. And suddenly this incredible dissonance. Now, many of us just put that, we go and we pour ourselves another brandy and blame it on the government, or we complain about how, the municipalities are. Actually, what's at work there is 2 parts of the brain conflicting with one another. And one is for safety's sake or for simplicity's sake, the elephant, and the other is the rider. And really what this analogy, it firstly explains that bittersweet experience that I'd had. But it also, and explains that by showing how the brain responds to information, and therefore how we need, as leaders of projects and initiatives, to shape our messaging accordingly. Because what happened there was the Springbok victory had awakened my elephant, which was the energy part to make me, I couldn't wait for Monday morning's meeting. We've just been inspired by 22 men on the rugby field, this diverse, racially diverse team. Anything's possible. So my elephant was revved up. Now I'm sitting in a meeting on Monday morning and I'm confronted with a file and I'm buried in data, buried in information. Where the hell do we start? Who the hell do we talk to? What's the story? And suddenly everything just implodes and we're back to normal again. And I think that was the experience for many South Africans. So really what the elephant and rider is about is that our brains have two sides. We have brains and we have brawn. And that's the nature of execution. We need some people to think things through, but we also need some people to get things done. And so the elephant, let's talk about the elephant for a while. The elephant, if you've been to the bush, as I know you have recently, they generally sit around. And they're quiet and they're sedate, and you'd never believe that they're capable of the expenditure of energy that we sometimes see them do when you've pissed them off. And that's the elephant. It really needs a good reason to get out of bed in the morning. It needs a strong why. But once it's moving, you cannot stop it. The best you can hope for is to direct its energy. And that's where the rider come in. The rider is there to make judicious use of information, to make sure that it doesn't flood the elephant with too much information, because that puts the elephant off. But at the same time, not starve it too much, because that causes it to wander off course, off the path of execution, and then the whole thing grinds to a halt anyway. So I think what we see here is, the perfect picture of how to craft and leverage messaging assets. Sometimes we're talking more to the elephant. Sometimes we need to be more sparing with information. We need to be more emotive in the messages we give. We need to provide a stronger context as to why the project is what it is, what it's going to do for consumers or the end user of our service or whatever. And sometimes it's not about context, it's about content. And content meaning the critical plays, the critical risks, the critical steps we have to do in the next fortnight so we can hit this milestone, get ourselves over the hump, and power our way on down the path to the final outcome of the project. So I hope that there's more to that, but I hope that's
it was a lovely visual analogy for me. But I think also I then went and watched some other videos, and I think they do talk about the path.
The path is critical.
And being able to provide the rider and with enough information to clear the obstacles off the path.
Exactly.
Clearly show the elephant where to go. We just went to the bush recently, as you know, and we had a little encounter with an elephant that was sort of sleeping and then it wasn't. It's quite important. But I think so many meetings, so many projects that I see is there's just no engagement of the elephant. It's all just about the rider and just about detail, and that there's that heart connection that's missing.
And that goes back to my point on TED, is we need to make people customers of the idea.
Yes, I love that. That's great.
And that's a thought that a guy called Lee Lefevre brought out. He founded Commoncraft, which was the original company that brought explainer videos to the world.
Okay.
And he said that he didn't understand the 2008 financial crisis until he listened to this particular podcast on This American Life. He says, and it really opened up the idea and then made it so clear that he could then digest. You see, one of the reasons he reckons we don't even bother to wrestle with an idea is because it's just too much mental energy. So we need somebody to open it up for us. And then it's that much easier to start putting flesh on the bones of the earlier understanding that person provided. So I think that's critical, is we've got to awaken the elephant and give the elephant not just a little bit of energy, but perpetuate the energy.
Yeah. That's so important.
And then you speak about the path. And I used to wonder in Unilever, there were these 6 competencies, and one of them was organizational awareness. And many people just read that as, oh, I've got to be a politician. But in fact, organizational awareness is the path. It's understanding the climate in which the project has to take place, the red tape, the kind of barriers that are going to be there. Because once the elephant hits the barrier, it just gets knocked off course. So the project leader has to have that far-seeing side to them to pick up what are the obstacles on the path and to go ahead and make sure the path is clear. That's the rider's job, not the elephant's job. The elephant is the energy side. So the rider, which is our project leader, has a lot on their plate. But hopefully this framework really helps them embrace that and actually become quite motivated by it.
Yeah. I mean, when I first saw your material, it resonated with me coming from an advertising background because agencies sell ideas.
Yeah.
But they're very often difficult to sell because people are scared by them or because we don't sell them particularly.
Correct.
But also what I then realized was no matter what business you're in, you are and what project you're leading, it still has an idea behind it that you're trying to get people behind. So it was a real revelation for me. What do you think? This is a big question. What do you think the key learning is of the course?
Well, it's more the key learning is this: you're already spending 40% of your time on non-sales selling, whether you like it or not. Right. You are wrestling with PowerPoint. You are standing in front of forums and boards and approvals and decision makers and rubber stampers. Are you doing it well? The answer is only you can be the judge of that. But why not do it right? And I think the key thing I want people to know is actually not that difficult. Even if you just leverage a few of the skills that are provided in this course, you are in quantum ways further down the track than you would ever be without them. So it's more an encouragement than anything else. If you ask me to really draw a bead on something, I would say audience understanding is absolutely critical. Because that in conjunction with the neuroscience, the elephant and rider analogy, answers so many questions. They're almost the magic bullets of communication, internal communication in big companies. But there are many other little gems, and I'm just dying to find people to teach it to again and again and again.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. So I mean, my perspective on is that it would help anyone in business, because I think we've all got projects that we have to get off the ground. We have to, push through. And I don't know what you've seen in your work sitting there in the UK and elsewhere. Just, I have found after COVID, there seems to be kind of a lack of project leadership. There seems to be an awakening of an idea for a project, and then somewhere along the line people run out of steam. And I don't know if it's just that everybody's in Zoom meetings or they haven't got the time, but I think it feels like it's a course that absolutely everybody in business at almost any level would benefit from.
I was reading, I forget who it was an author who was asked, why did you write this book? And I said, well, I wrote a book that I would want to read. And this was a course that I would have wanted to have done. Right. I would want it to have been lined up and ready for me as a young ABM or BM working at Unilever, where I made way too many mistakes for my own good. It kind of, I don't want to say it's for everybody, because I primarily made it for those people who are regularly leading project teams, convening project teams, and managing energy of those diverse people, from supply chain to financial people to sales people and R&D people and so on. I'm just currently running a cohort with an R&D group, and for the fourth time with this particular client, and it's going really, really well. It lands in that space very, very well. So it's and
I'm sure
I made it for myself, and it's proving to be relevant.
That's brilliant. I mean, I know that you talk about storytelling and the message arc and that sort of thing, and I'm sure that some of the people that you are talking to probably find that a bit uncomfortable in the beginning to kind of get their heads around that. How do they get the hang of it?
I've dialed down storytelling quite considerably since the early days, and that's because it is a word that it's either black or white, wet or dry, chalk or cheese. And there are actually there's a guy called Richard Tobacco-Walla, and he talks about companies being run either by the story or the spreadsheet. Microsoft is a company run on the spreadsheet. In other words, the detail, the execution. And WeWork was a company ran on the story, but got too high on its own story. And so what I've tried to do here is synthesize both the heart of what it takes to run a project and the actual executional side, the hard as nails reality that we've got to get stuff done.
Right.
So storytelling does come into it, particularly when it comes to awakening the elephant and giving our project a strong why. But storytelling is also valuable when it comes to highlighting project risks, because we will invariably, companies have huge histories to draw from and lots of stories, anecdotes, and cautionary tales of what went wrong in the past and what we need to avoid on this project. So I'm a little bit light-handed with the word story, and I'm a little more tactical with it as well.
But as you said, allows you then to factor in the risk components of it.
Precisely. And what I really want. Yeah, I'm sorry. What I really want is I want people to see the whole project as a story. You know, you're a team of people embarking, in many cases, into the unknown. It might be a huge unknown, like a brand new category that you're entering, but it also could be quite a small unknown where the business case is different to anything you ever dealt with, or the R&D challenge is that much harder for everybody, or the manufacturing challenge. And these are unknowns. And unknowns are the nature of great epics. So the idea of people seeing the project as a story is key to managing the inflections of energy and the communication around all of that. So I think you ask a great question there. I love the idea of stories and storytelling, but I've been deliberately quite judicious in that.
Yeah, no, it's very cleverly done. So, well, thank you for that. That's wonderful. I'm going to share some links, and people can go and have a look at the course outline and hopefully get involved, because I've loved diving into it, and you are an encyclopedia of learning about how the brain works and decisions and things. So I've really enjoyed it, and hope others will too.
Also want to thank you for all the hard work you've put into it. For those who don't know, Gillian puts an incredible amount of work into constructing the courses, selling the courses, and building PR around the courses, and it's all useful content, and that's something that's lacking in the world today. So thanks for making your idea accessible and building strong emotion but equally a real reality around what you do. So that's great.
Thanks, Brian. Well, thanks so much. Lovely to chat, and
absolutely.
I hope it stops raining.
Thank you. Bye for now.